Right. Hi, everybody. I am Becca Johnson Barksdale, class of 2014. So I am almost not a young alumni anymore. They tell me I age out in May or June. I'm an attorney based in Pittsburgh, and I'm very excited to hear from Victor Smith today. He was class of 2010, so we didn't overlap, but almost. He is an attorney in Florida. He's been practicing for about 11 years down there. He started in personal injury, workers' compensation, and disability, and has transitioned over the last couple of years to construction litigation. Like I said, he graduated in 2010 with his bachelor's degree in political science, was a member of the Pre-Legal and Business Honor Society, the football team, the Student Athletic Advisory Council, a Res Life staff member, and established the Victor T. Smith Esquire Scholarship Fund in 2021. He is currently on the Gettysburg College Alumni Board of Directors, where he is on the development and DEIJ committees. As far as personal life, he says he is passionate about traveling and cooking and is an avid podcast listener. And I think that's all of it. So I'll pass it over to Victor.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Becca. And good evening, everyone. As Becca mentioned, my name is Victor Smith, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about negotiation today. Um, uh, First and foremost, I want to point out that negotiation has been something that humans have been doing literally for our entire existence. Some of the first recorded histories that we have around the globe are transactions that were based in a barter system. And whatever you're doing um, in negotiation, it's akin to bartering. So before there were established currencies and things of that nature, people traded goods and they would negotiate values of goods. You know, a bag of tea spices was worth whatever, 2 rocks or however it would work out to be way back when. And as human societies have evolved and developed, the skills necessary for negotiation probably have evolved with us, but they haven't changed very much. And I think, like any good business or any good organization, in order to be successful in negotiation, the first thing you have to understand is what your end goal is or where you want to end up. So it may seem counterintuitive, but you have to start from your ending. In my profession, what I am most often negotiating over is the amount of damage someone has suffered due to someone's unlawful act. As Becca mentioned, I first started practicing law largely around injury related litigation. So it could be car accidents, could be slip and falls, could be products liabilities. It could be people who are injured on their job, or people who unfortunately contracted injuries or illnesses that made them incapable of functioning, or at least from a professional standpoint, being able to return to work. And so we would litigate their disability policies or their eligibility for Social Security disability benefits. And often in those cases, we're trying to put a value on someone's life or the impact that an injury has led to diminish someone's life. And our clients would have varying goals or what financial motivations they wish to accomplish. And in order to be able to negotiate for them effectively, we had to know what their end game was, what they wanted to accomplish. Once you have that at your disposal, you're then able to articulate or create a plan that allows you to move towards accomplishing that goal. But of course, as you are probably well aware, you don't get to negotiate in a vacuum, and you certainly don't negotiate without someone who's combating what you're attempting to accomplish. That's not just for litigation, that's for any kind of negotiation. Um, I assume many of you have negotiated salaries or purchased vehicles or homes and have had to deal with some aspect of negotiating. And in order to be able to craft your plan, I think you have to understand a few things. So once you know what your end game is, the first thing I believe after that you should consider is what kind of leverage you have over your adversary, or what points of leverage do they have over you. Negotiation is more of an art than it is a science. You don't have a specific formula that says if I have X and I add Y, I get to Z. It doesn't work that way. Um, it does allow for you to utilize other skills or things at your disposal. I'll frankly say it, like lying is actually something you can do to be beneficial to yourself in negotiation. Certainly attempting to bluff your parties, like it's a game of poker. And if you have things that are leveraged to your advantage, you want to try to maximize those to put your adversary at a disadvantaged position. Conversely, if you're someone who is at a position where you lack leverage, you want to try to hide those. So as Becca pointed out in the intro that she provided of me, a couple of years ago, I changed practice areas in law firms. I went from what would be termed probably a medium-sized law firm that had 10 lawyers here in Florida to a small law firm. We only have 3 at the one I presently work at. And during my interview, everything went incredibly well. And I was asked what I wanted my starting salary to be. And this was the first attempt of my employer to take the leverage of I'm the one who has this position. There was no salary information about the position I was looking for. And I knew this, and he, what he's trying to get me to do is set the parameters inside of where we're going to negotiate monetarily. There's a belief that in negotiation, the first person to offer a figure is the person who's going to lose because you've arbitrarily set your ceiling. And so to use just random numbers, if I had told my employer that day that I wanted $100,000 for my base salary, there's no way I'm getting it. I've capped myself. And I had a goal of what I wanted to earn from my employer. And so what I did in an attempt to flip that leverage, instead of giving him a number that automatically capped him, I flipped it on. And I explained, based upon my resume and things I had accomplished in my practice career, I thought that I should be paid. And what I said to him was I should be paid commensurate of an attorney at that time that had about 9 years experience in the field, but I wouldn't give him a figure. Of course, because he's a well-experienced litigator who negotiates all the time as well, he immediately tried to flip the leverage back on me and said, well, you're moving into a new practice area and you don't have 9 years of experience here. And so it was a game of cat and mouse, and I ultimately gave him a figure, and he actually ended up paying me that figure that I wanted. But I think he was testing me to see what kind of mind I had for negotiating. And so one thing I would suggest to you all, particularly in negotiating salaries, is if you apply to a position that doesn't list what the salary range is or what the salary is going to be, you will be asked that question in your interview. And if you're not asked that question in the interview, it's imperative that you ask your employer that question or your potential employer that question. You may be able to set them up in a position where they don't ask you what kind of salary you're looking for, and you ask them what they're willing to offer, and now they give you a figure, you have made them set the floor. Now you know if they find you to be attractive and they say, but we're going to pay you $60,000 a year to perform this position, you tell them, no, it's not good enough. I need more. And now they can't back out of that figure that they've given you, and you've exerted some leverage and influence into your position. Um, the next thing that, well, before I move on from that, does anyone have questions? If you want, you can type questions in the chat as I go along, and I'll address them as they pop up. Or if you've got a question you'd like to share verbally, just raise your hand, and I'll take questions as I go along. But does anyone have any questions about leverage or how to try to apply it, how to get out of it if you feel like you're in a disadvantaged position?
Oh,
All right. The next thing that I would say is important for negotiation after knowing what your end game is and uh, taking into consideration what kind of leverage you have is uh, really understanding what value you personally have, or in my professional cases, what value my client's case has, and how that puts my adversary at risk. All right. Okay, so I do have a question in the chat. The question is, how about asking the range for things you are negotiating? Okay. If I can ask a clarifying question on that question, by range, I assume you mean like a range of money or a range of like a bracket of values. Would that be accurate, Sharon?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Um, I do think asking about ranges is something that can be very beneficial. In my professional negotiating, it's a tool that we use often. Something that you're taught in law school and probably business school and other financial endeavors, but bracketing, where you use a range of values to sort of exhibit control over the negotiation that you're inside of. So if we were to apply this to my salary example that I gave you from my personal most recent interview with my employer, with no salary range having being listed in the job listing that I applied to, me asking my employer or saying I demand a range of salary would be a good way to exhibit leverage or influence over the negotiation. What you would want to do in that situation is, if you know your goal, obviously you'd want your goal to be inside of that bracket. You wouldn't want to make your bracket, the high end of your bracket, your goal, and you certainly do not want to make your low end of the bracket the number you wish to get. So for my example, if I wanted a $70,000 salary, then what I would propose is maybe a bracket of, I'm willing to work for between 65,000 and 85,000. If I propose that bracket, you have 65,000 and 85,000. The middle point of that is 77,500. So I'm hoping to convey to my adversary that 77,500 would be the number that is my goal. They don't know that my number is actually lower than that. But in bracketing, what you're trying to do is get people to think the midpoint of your parameters is the objective. So in that situation, I have tried to exhibit influence. I set a midpoint that's over what my goal is. And so bracketing can be very useful. Conversely, on the flip side of that, you're often going to see jobs posted where a salary range is provided to you by the potential employer. And the salary range is often going to say, salaries range between $60,000 and $90,000 commensurate with your experience or education or what have you. In that situation, you would need to determine from your employer just how important the education and experience is in their mind to see where you would fall in that bracket range. So for the first job that I ever applied to, I had zero experience as an attorney when I came out of law school. And I was looking for jobs. I managed to land one in a private law firm, but I didn't have leverage for salary ranges. If it was going to be premised on the amount of experience I had, well, I had zero. And I couldn't use my legal education as an advantage when applying for a lawyer position because everybody's got a law degree. So I had no leverage. I was in a position where I could have been told, hey, this is what the salary is. You can take it or you go somewhere else. What I tried to use for my advantage was just the fact that I was a young person who could be committed to staying somewhere long term. And that made me more attractive than maybe someone who already had a family who maybe would be looking to leave for a better salary opportunity right away, or maybe they were away from their families and wanted to get their children back near grandparents, etc. I tried to make my employers that I applied for when I first came out of law school, I tried to convince them that I was dedicated to staying in that area of Florida. Um, Whether it was true or not, they had no way of knowing that. It definitely wasn't actually. I had zero intention of staying in Florida at the time. I have obviously made the decision to stay for various reasons, but that was the only way I had the ability to try to exude some leverage into the salary negotiations. And when I saw brackets, that's what I tried to do. When I applied to places that just offered me whatever a figure was, if it was enough for me, I considered it. And if it wasn't, I didn't, because I had very limited leverage because of my lack of experience as a lawyer. Um, Now it would be different. I have 11 years practice experience. Um, I clearly have shown that I'm dedicated to stay in the state of Florida and practice in my community. I've only lived as a lawyer within a 30-mile range, so I haven't really gone anywhere. Um, and that is something that would be to my advantage. It would be leverage that I could show. I am a very loyal employee. I've been a lawyer for 11 years. I've only worked at two law firms. I worked at one of them for almost 9 years. Um, that would be my way to put leverage and put influence on them. And I, at this point, if I were ever to look for a new job here, which I'm not interested in doing, um, I would probably propose a salary bracket, um, to put pressure on my employer to get them to think I want to be somewhere in that range, with my goal of hitting a midpoint and having that midpoint be higher than what my actual salary goal is. Does anyone else have any additional questions at this moment? All right. Um, the next thing that I would encourage when it comes to negotiation is, just like in the description of the class, um, it's something that should be fun or competitive if you're that kind of mindset. As Becca told you guys, I was an athlete at Gettysburg, and I am super competitive, and I love games. I will play board games for hours and hours and hours. And if I try to approach my negotiations at work uh, as a game, not to trivialize what my clients have gone through, but in the moment where I'm negotiating against other attorneys, what we are engaging in is a competitive endeavor that's a game. The same way I feel about when we put our cases on trial. It's a game. It's a game of weaving a story for a jury to convince them that the evidence you've developed is um, more substantial or stronger than your adversaries. And in success in any kind of competitive endeavor, you have got to plan and know your opponent. And so, um, if it's a negotiation for salary, you want to have done your homework on the employer. You want to try to find out as much as you can about the company or business that you're applying to. If you can find information about your potential boss or the person that you're going to interview with, try to find that out. You can use that to your advantage. You can use that to help influence, um, excuse me, I can use that to get some leverage, get some advantage on your side. Um, when I ultimately chose the first ever law firm I worked for, the interview is really what sold me on it. And when I walked into the interview, my employer or potential employer, he pulls out my resume. He doesn't ask me about law school. He doesn't ask me about any of my honors from law school. He didn't ask me about, Dean's List at Gettysburg or anything like that. He says, "Oh, you played football." And then he asked me what position I played. And then we went on this rant for 30 minutes in my interview about college football. Uh, I had known that he was a huge college football fan. I may not have put it on my resume for every law firm that I applied to, but I put something up there that really caught his attention and allowed me to gain connection and influence on him when I've never met this man before. And then it became very easy for me to kind of get the things I wanted as an attorney with no experience and get a very attractive uh, employment package offered to me to work for him. And that's where I worked for almost 9 years before I left. And that's something that you can do not only in your salary negotiations, but if you're looking to buy a new car, um, looking to buy a new home, any little tidbit of information that you can get on the person that you're going to potentially be negotiating with to cultivate some kind of position of strength is great. to connect it back to what I mentioned about games and competition. Um, that's like game planning. Um, Back in college, when I played football, a lot of our week was spent dissecting and evaluating the film of our opponent, various games that they had played that particular season and various previous seasons. All of that with the intention of being able to um, gain an advantage in the competition of what we were going to be doing on the field. And in football, offensive and defensive play calling is a form of negotiation. You're trying to outwit your opponent by what you call, and your opponent's trying to do the exact same thing to you, all based upon the hours of developed information that you've obtained, and you're also trying to anticipate your opponent's call and make a call that exploits where they are. It's the same thing when you're going to buy a car, going to buy a home, negotiating for jewelry, whatever, negotiating with your husband or wife about where you're going to go to dinner, where you're going to go on vacation. You can use all of these tools to uh, manipulate and change the odds into your favor to get the outcomes that you want. But whatever you do, please don't tell your spouses that you came to me and learned to manipulate and take advantage of them. I did not go into family law for a very good reason. Um, and so that is something that I think is very important, is getting as much information you can and being prepared uh, to use that to your advantage against your adversary is a very, very important tool. Does anyone have any questions about ways you can utilize the information you gather, or like what kind of information you may want to obtain when you're looking into your employers or people that you want to gather information whom you're going to be negotiating against? Right. Um, the last, not necessarily the last thing, but uh, something that I think is very important as well is, if you've been involved in a negotiation or you're in a negotiation and you've been offered what you have come to accomplish, don't stop negotiating there. It may sound greedy, and I think greed is a horrible, horrible attribute for someone to have. However, in the very finite window of negotiation, being a little greedy will be to your benefit when you've hit your goal. Um, which takes us back to the beginning of, you have to know where you want to end up in order to push this level of greed, or this attribute of greed that I'm addressing now. Okay. I have a question again in the chat. And the question is, what if you do not feel you are not making a good connection or impression with someone? Is there a way to turn things around? That is a great question. And that is very important. I certainly have been involved in negotiations where um, it's difficult to make a good connection. This happens often in what I do as a litigator, because the lawyers come to the table to negotiate on behalf of clients who obviously do not have good impressions of each other. If they did have good impressions of each other, they probably would have never come to lawyers to resolve their problem. And so the lawyers are stuck in a position where, by our ethical duties, we're obligated to zealously advocate for our clients' positions, which means the lawyers often end up being in positions where they, I'm not going to say we dislike each other or we have a problem with each other, but naturally we're fighting against each other, both trying to accomplish our clients' goals. Um, some of the things that I have tried to do in my work as a litigator in those situations where I can tell in a mediation or just an informal negotiation session, the things aren't going well, and it's because there is a bad connection between the parties or between me and the other lawyer. Um, I try to distance myself then and try to get the personal feelings or the personal emotions out of the negotiation. And then that tends to help resolve that concern that you raised in your chat question, Sharon. However, for most of you, if you're having this question and it's in your situation where you're trying to purchase something or you're negotiating your salary, what have you, obviously you cannot remove that personal, emotional emphasis of the situation as easily. You can't disconnect from the fact that you're looking to obtain a salary to support you and your family or take care of yourself. Um, in that situation, what I would recommend, if you can tell that you're not having a good connection and you want to try to turn that around, um, it may behoove you to kind of allow your adversary a little bit of control in the situation, particularly if you've been trying to say or do things to make a connection and you continue to miss the mark. And for whatever reason, what you're trying to do is not being received well. And that's a situation where you may not step back emotionally, obviously, from your personal situation, but maybe you step back from trying to dictate the terms of the negotiation. Um, I don't like when people compare things to war, but the analogy here is appropriate. Sometimes in battle, soldiers don't always attack. Sometimes you have to retreat. Sometimes you have to give up a battle here for the greater good of what you're trying to accomplish down the line in the war. Negotiation can be the same way. If you've attempted to make a certain connection with your adversary and it's clearly not going well, that may be a time where you want to step back, maybe just pose a question to them, a softball type question that puts the ball back in their court, so to speak, and lets them begin to dictate. They may feel, oh, great, I have now gotten the upper hand because I'm starting to dictate the negotiation, where all along that was part of your plan. You wanted them to dictate so they could start to feel comfortable. And maybe through their dictating of the path of the negotiation, you could find a new inroad to make a new connection that now helps flip the leverage back to your side. Um, so that's a very good question. That is something that I imagine most people who engage in negotiations have, whether it's in my line of negotiating or just anything that you may negotiate. Does anyone have any additional questions along that line? All right. And so I'll go back to what I had referenced about um, in negotiation. At times, it's appropriate to be and exhibit some greed, and um, you would want to do that in a situation where you've already been offered what you came to achieve. And once you've gotten that, there's a phrase in my profession and just generally in negotiation. People don't backtrack from their offers, and it's not wise to negotiate against yourself. What that would mean is negotiating against yourself. I offer you $10 for something and you say no. And then instead of you making a counter offer, I immediately drop my offer from 10 to $5. I wouldn't want to do that. That's a very ineffective way to negotiate. I'm harming myself. Um, but in the event that you are in a salary negotiation, for example, and you want $50,000 to perform a job, and they've offered you $50,000 right off the bat, there's nothing wrong with you. Sure, you take it if that's going to make you happy, but you have the opportunity there to go ahead and see how much you can get out of the negotiation above what you had set your goal to be. Now, you want to be reasonable when you do this. You know, if a job is offering you $50,000 and you're okay with that, the response wouldn't be, well, actually, I want 100 grand, because what's going to happen there? They're going to say, no, thank you, you're ridiculous, and they're going to walk away. But if they say, yeah, we're willing to give you $50,000 to do this job, and that was your goal, you could easily say, you know, $50,000 sounds enticing, but I'd really like 62,500. You know, that's not an unreasonable increase. And ultimately, what they would probably think is, oh, this person probably wants like 60 grand. That's why they left a little buffer. So they come back and say, we can't do 62.5. We could do 57.5. Boom. Now you've gotten 7,500 more dollars out of them just by being a little greedy. So while in almost all other endeavors in my life, I loathe greed, and I don't like people who just want to take, take, take. You have to be a little selfish at times in negotiation to accomplish your goals and put you in a better position for success. Um, and I think specifically as this relates to negotiating salaries or like looking for employment, something that can be very useful to you is not waiting to look for your next place of employment or next position or your next promotion at your current employer um, until the last minute. So if you want to change career paths, if you want to move to a different employer because you're looking to seek better employment, even if you're in a position financially to say, oh, I can take a couple of months off from work and, I'll really hone in on a job search. I would not advise doing that, because when you sit down at the negotiating table for salaries, if your employer knows that you are presently unemployed, they have leverage over you. Either you're looking for this new position because you absolutely have to get back to work, or you're in a position where you have nothing to make their offer compete against. Unfortunately for me, when I was looking for the job that I presently have, I was unemployed. My position had been terminated at my old law firm because the firm was in financial difficulties during the pandemic, and some of us more seasoned and higher salaried associates got axed as capitalism casualties. It happens. It did not put me in an advantageous position for negotiating salaries, though. I had just bought my house about 4 months before I lost my job, and I knew I had to get employed. Had very little interest in buying a new home and then immediately starting to get in default trouble with my mortgage company. Also, if you have financial issues as a lawyer, you become a risk, at least in Florida. The Florida bar will examine your character and fitness to practice law, because if I'm in financial difficulties, my clients are at risk of me maybe stealing from them or doing things like that. So it's very important that I maintained employment. Of course, I didn't have a bulk of savings that I had, say, 6 months before, because I sank that into my down payment and everything and buying the house. So I didn't have leverage, or I didn't have something to compare my salary offer with from my present employer. They offered me what they did, and I wasn't able to say, well, Mr. Robertson, who is my boss, Peter, um, I appreciate the offer you have, but I'm already employed right now, and they're paying me $15,000 a year more, $20,000 a year more, whatever it is. I could be telling the truth. I could be lying about that. It doesn't really matter. But the fact that I wasn't actively employed at that time, I had no ability to be able to do that. I do not think that Peter intentionally like held my salary down as a result, but I wasn't able to, or it was one less tool of I had at my disposal to negotiate with them. So a phrase that I like to think of is something I heard from someone some years ago. You should always appreciate your position while plotting your own promotion. And that can be inside of where you work right now. There aren't really promotions where I work because we are an incredibly small law firm, which I thoroughly love because I get to be truly involved with my clients day to day. But some law firms have hundreds of lawyers in them, and there are tiers of employment. There's senior partners and junior partners and equity partners and all kinds of different levels, and senior associates and junior associates and on and on. And I know people in those kind of law firms who are constantly looking for ways to negotiate and try to advance. I also know people who have left law firms and they were looking for work 6, 9 months while they still did their work and advocated for their clients extremely well at their current position, but they were able to utilize that as leverage and obtain employment elsewhere. In fact, one of the associates that just used to work at this law firm did that very thing because he wanted to go work back closer to where his son lives on the opposite coast of Florida. And he certainly utilized his position and his success here helping us to help get him the things he wanted to make it worth his while to move about 200 miles away to the opposite side of the state. And so do not be afraid while you're employed or while you own a car or while you own a home. If it's something that you think down the line you're going to want to purchase a new home or trade in your vehicle or what have you, get a new job, do not be afraid to look while you are comfortable where you are, because it adds to your arsenal of things that you can negotiate with. Does anyone have any questions related to that? All right. And so what I'll do now is just, again, a brief recap of what we've gone over. Like I said at the very beginning of the talk, negotiation is a skill and an aspect of human life that we've had literally from the beginning of time, all the way back to the trade and barter systems. And the successful negotiator does a few things that I think aren't formulaic, but are sort of the central points of how someone who is good at negotiating does. And first, is knowing where you want to end. Once you know where you want to end, you're able to cultivate a plan of action and a path of how to get there. And knowing your ending is a great way to be able to craft how you'll begin. Um, Once you know where you're going to end, you want to be able to find and understand how you can use leverage to your advantage in that situation, but also just as important is to understand how your adversary may use leverage to their advantage over you. Once you have an understanding of that, you can um, craft a plan of how to attack that. To be able to do that, you want to try to gather as much information as possible. Find ways that you're able to make connections with your adversary when you're negotiating. Uh, Gather as much information as possible. Try to find the information out that you'll be able to utilize to your advantage. And yes, as asked in the chat, sometimes when you do that, you will potentially miss your mark and not make connections with your adversary or whoever you're negotiating against. If that were to happen, it is okay to step back and let your adversary kind of take control of the or excuse me, I almost said deposition. I hope none of you are ever in a deposition. They're terrible. Um, take control of the negotiation. And sometimes you have to be willing to lose a battle while you're negotiating to ultimately win the war that you're attempting to accomplish. And the last thing that we went over is greed. Although greed is a terrible uh, thing for a person to have under most circumstances, a slight amount of greed when it comes to negotiation can actually be quite beneficial for you to exceed your goal and achieve great things. And the last thing I would say is what's most important about negotiation is how I negotiate and how my personality is maybe drastically different from Jasmine, or from Becca, or from any other person that exists on Earth. You have to be true to yourself. Some people are more naturally aggressive, some people are less aggressive. People come with anxieties and fears, etc., all kinds of things like that. But at the core of negotiation, just as well as anything that you do, um, you have to understand yourself. You have to stay true to yourself. If you do that, you very well know where you want to end up, and you'll very well craft a plan to be able to accomplish those goals. You may not be 100% successful in negotiating if you follow the path of the steps I've laid out, but you'll have far more successes than failures. And anyone who tells you that they've won every single negotiation they've ever been in is absolutely lying. That is just not possible, or they're only negotiating with their children, where they ultimately can just tell them what to do. And so, and in the adult world, that's not going to be the case. I have gotten wiped on the floor in negotiations as an attorney. I've wiped other people across the floor. I've left negotiations where both sides are a little aggravated. Most frankly, are probably the best negotiations in my professional life, at least. It means there's a true compromise and we probably resolved a legal problem as opposed to having, in this state, six strangers, in the jury box and one alternate rule. And don't be afraid to make what seems like a mistake or um, what you think in the short term might hurt your negotiations. Negotiations can continue for as long or as little as you need them to. It's a nice thing about negotiating is you have the ability to exhibit control and attempt to accomplish something, whatever that goal may be. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to my presentation today. If anyone has any questions, regarding this presentation or just in general, if you would ever want to ask questions about negotiating, being an attorney, life, whatever, I am putting my chat, or excuse me, my email in the chat. You can feel free to email me at any time. If you've got questions about things with the college, things about the alumni board of directors, don't ever hesitate to reach out to me. I will gladly answer them. And I just thank you all for taking the time.
Thank you.